मृत्योर्मामृतं गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मामृतं गमय तमसो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मामृतं गमय। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति।
A very good afternoon to all of you. I am Sime Yogendra Pal Singh, Secretary to the Sustainability Standard Board of the Institute. So I welcome you all to this fifth webinar of the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam series organized by the Sustainability Standard Board of the ICMI. And the topic for today's webinar is Indian Perspective to ESG. And to undertake this session, we have with us Dr. Sudhendra Putti. He's Associate Vice President, Scient Limited, as a distinguished speaker for today. And I would like to inform all the participants that at the end of this session, we will be taking up the questions. So please do post your queries, if any, in the chat box. So before I hand over the session to Dr. Sudhendra Putti, sir, I would like to give a brief introduction of him. Dr. Sudhendra Putti is a fellow member of the Institute of Company Secretaries of India and holds a degree in Commerce and Law and postgraduate degree in Public Personnel Management. He holds PhD in Corporate Secretaryship and completed the Leadership Development Program at Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. He is the Company Secretary of Scient Limited, where he drives the global corporate governance, secretarial and ESG function of the group. He led a team that won the prestigious ICSI National Award for Excellence in Corporate Governance in 2014. Under his stewardship, the company also won the Golden Peacock Award for Corporate Governance and Risk Management. He has over 2 decades of professional experience as company secretary in the government, private and non-profit sectors globally. And on ESG front, he has been instrumental in Scient getting a maiden top Dow Jones Sustainability Index score, including a best-in-class score for the corporate governance. He has over 10 years of experience as a journalist and has written extensively for leading newspapers such as the Hindu, Deccan Chronicle, on a wide range of topics varying from films, fashion to religion, spirituality to feature and sports. He is a regular contributor to articles to SEBI and Corporate Law, Taxman Group of Publications and Chartered Secretary. He is a prolific speaker and has spoken at various seminars and conferences globally in the UK, US and Middle East. In May 2023, he participated in the second International Conference of Company Secretaries in London and delivered an acclaimed talk on fostering the diversity, equality and inclusion imperative. He has also spoken at the Modern Governance Summit in 2022 and 23 at Texas and Orlando, respectively, which was attended by over 1,000 delegates. Sir, we are very grateful to you for taking out time of your busy schedule and kindly agreeing to address the participants of this webinar. Over to you, sir.
A very good evening and thanks for the kind words of introduction. At the outset, let me thank you for giving me this opportunity of coming and sharing some of my experiences, sharing some of my thoughts on ESG and providing an Indian perspective to the whole matter. At the outset, before I get started, I would just want to preface my talk, my conversation with you with a couple of caveats. These are my personal views and these do not represent the views of either my company or the institute. So I'm speaking purely from my in my personal capacity. And there are real world examples that I will of course be touching upon. I would also like to laud the SSB of the Institute for this wonderful initiative that they have been taking. ESG, as we will see in the next hour or so, internationally, globally, is getting a lot of importance. And this is something where professionals from all spheres will have a lot of scope to contribute, whether in industry or in practice, or even in terms of being in the academic world. So ESG is something which is going to be the new paradigm, and it's extremely laudable. It's extremely happy to note that the Institute has constituted an SSB to focus on these specific aspects. So I think this reflects the kind of importance that the regulators and the professional bodies are providing to this subject. And in the months and years to come, this will not just remain a buzzword, but it will translate into something very concrete, as indeed it has over the last few years. So with this brief introduction, I'll quickly jump into the presentation. And as was mentioned by Mr. Singh at the start, please do make a note of your queries, whatever you might have. And I'd be glad to answer them to the best of my abilities at the end of the conversation. So the ESG and the Indian perspective, or an Indian perspective to ESG, is what I wanted to share my thoughts and experiences about. And for starters, let's try to understand or unravel what ESG or the process of ESG itself entails before we get into the Indian perspective. Next slide, please. Fine. So I'm sure, and I don't want to take coals to Newcastle, all of you are pretty much aware, as I just said, that ESG is the new buzzword in the industry for the last few years. It is an acronym. It is a short form for environment, society, and governance. So these are the three buckets or the three pillars on which the entire process of sustainability as such is going to be predicated upon. So ESG stands for the environment, the society, and growth, or the governance model. And these are predicated, these are built upon the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs as they are called, which were formulated by the United Nations. These 17 SDGs, which you find at the bottom of the slide, are spread across a whole lot of activities, starting from human rights, environment, safeguarding natural resources, eliminating poverty, providing equal opportunity. And then there are several paradigms that get interwoven into it. For instance, things like diversity, equity, inclusion are all significant components or parts of the ESG process itself. So when we try to unravel and understand ESG, they are the three central factors in measuring the societal and sustainable impact that a company has within itself, as well as how much it contributes to the nation, and indeed at the larger level at the global in the global context itself. So ESG are three significant pillars, the aggregate of which is what we call the sustainability paradigm or the sustainability process. And how this is evolving and why this is important, we will see in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. So for starters, again, just to understand, why is ESG important at all? If it has become a buzzword, if everybody is talking about ESG, what is it that is driving? What is what are the key factors that are ensuring that ESG is the talk of the town? There was a research done by EY, the consulting firm, the audit and consulting firm across the globe, and they came out with some very interesting findings. A staggering 98% of the investors, predominantly institutional investors who were surveyed, did say that they would evaluate non-financial disclosures either in a formal or informal manner. And you would see that to a very large extent, the disclosures around ESG are all primarily non-financial. Of course, everything has a quantitative or a financial impact in the long run. But it's interesting, it's quite important to understand that a staggering 98% of the institutional investors said that they would evaluate non-financial parameters and disclosures while making any decisions regarding their investment. Equally, 83% of the investors who had been surveyed as part of their program by EY said that they consider formal networks to be necessary frameworks to be necessary. They do believe that ESG cannot simply be a wishy-washy kind of activity. It's not something which is a tick in the box or people just do some kind of lip service. But ESG, for it to become a reality, they said that there had to be in place certain formal frameworks to assess, understand, and evaluate the long-term value that a company was creating. So while on the one hand, non-financial disclosures were important, they also wanted that a framework had to be kept in place. 3/4 of the investors, that is about 75% of the surveyed population, said that they would find value in assurance of the robustness of an organization's plan for climate risks. So specifically on the environment front, it became clear that more and more companies, more and more investors wanted to understand what was being done by a corporate, by a company, insofar as the environment, insofar as the planet Earth itself was concerned. Ancillary to this, there were also a couple of other driving factors. Stringent and increasing regulation. The regulatory authorities also do not live in isolation. They reflect the ethos of what is happening in the society. And therefore, we will see that in one of the following slides. In the Indian context, and indeed in the global context, there was more focused, there was more emphasis that was being laid on ESG disclosures, and there's a regulatory framework that is emerging. It is still, of course, work in progress. It will emerge in the fullness of time as we go towards integrated reporting. So regulation also started to mandate. Sorry, just go back to the previous slide. So regulation also insisted that there had to be some focus on ESG. Besides, the demand for non-financial information, as we just saw above, was also on the increase, and more global accords like the United Nations Global Compact or the SDGs that we just saw, the Global Reporting Initiative. There were a clutch of global entities that were involved in the ESG program, and all of them were laying emphasis on the fact that we needed to have greater disclosures, that globally we needed to understand and tackle this problem of ESG. Next slide. Yes, so while we understood what was driving, why ESG was required, it's also important to understand that what are the key business drivers. Ultimately, any decision that a corporate, that an entity tends to take is driven by what business imperatives it has, what are the business paradigms that are behind it. And so therefore, as we thought, one of the key driving forces is, of course, from the investment community. As we just saw in the previous slide, over 98% of the investors, as part of the EY survey, did say that non-financial disclosures in a formal or informal manner would merit importance for them. Equally, 79% of asset managers said that while making a decision to make investments, ESG is incorporated as one of the parameters, as one of the line items that they would consider while making an investment decision. Besides, ESG is not to be seen in a silo. It operates across segments in the entire, it permeates the entire corporate organization. So when you look at the supply chain, the complexity with which it is emerging, the kind of interdependence that the global economy finds itself in today, it became evident that information technology and services companies and manufacturing companies, of course, so whether it was engaged in services or in manufacture, they're exposed to an entire supply chain across labor, safety, and climate risks. So the imperative was being driven by the investors on the one side, and also the kind of business that an entity was engaged in. The third key component that drives is, of course, the stakeholder, the most important stakeholder, which is the customer expectations. The customer expectations have also been constantly evolving, given that we are in a highly wired and synced economy. Globally, a majority of the customers do now expect that data is protected, that companies that they deal with are energy efficient, they are sustainable in the long run, and they pay heed to some of the matters such as human rights, basic respect, diversity, inclusion, and so on. So the customer, who's ultimately the king, for whom all the services or all the production has to happen, also has started to demand more and more emphasis on ESG. And then, as I briefly said, there is also the imperative that is coming from the regulatory landscape in the Indian context. Also, we will look at that in one of the following slides. And the exponential climate impacts that are happening. We have been looking at even in India, how the climatic conditions have been changing. Summers are not what it used to be in the past. Winters and rainy seasons are not what they used to be in the past. It's now raining in summers. It's pretty warm and humid during the rainy season, and the winter, at least in certain parts of India, has ceased to exist. All this has become a reality today, an unfortunate reality, because nature has been ravished, and there's a rampant misuse of nature. So this has made it mandatory for there's been a exponential climate impact, and it's roughly, on an average, 1.5 degrees is going to go up in temperature over the next several years. So the reality that we face in the real world is also something which is driving. And finally, there is the shifts in technology, the digital transformation, where the demands for greater efficiency, transparency, and innovation, and disclosures in terms of non-financial or non-quantitative matters is also driving. So I think in a nutshell, the business drivers for ESG are also several, and it's important to keep this at the back of our mind as we go on this journey of ESG. Next slide. So as I briefly touched upon, there are several global entities or global measuring standards that have emerged, that are emerging. There is the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative. There is the IIRC, which is the Integrated Reporting Council. There is the SDGs, which have been developed by the United Nations. There is the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which has significant buy-in from the global accounting profession. They have identified a subset of ESG issues which are relevant to the financial performance of companies. In addition, there is the United Nations Global Compact, and over a period of time, several ESG or sustainability measurement and reporting standards are emerging. All this will ensure that there is a standard framework against which to measure, because this was, as we saw in one of the earlier slides, investors do believe that there has to be a standard set of formats. There has to be a framework against which performance can be measured. And these are some which have emerged over a period of time. In the Indian context also, we have been doing a lot of things. The regulators, be it the Ministry of Corporate Affairs or the SEBI, have been coming through with a lot of changes over the last several years to make ESG or sustainability reporting a reality. Next slide, please. So this, over the last nearly a decade or so, gives you a background, gives you an understanding on how things have flowed. It started with the NVG, the National Voluntary Guidelines, about 10 years ago or 10 plus years ago, where the Ministry of Corporate Affairs said that the top 100 listed companies measured on market cap needed to publish a business responsibility report. And over a period of time, those who follow the listing regulations will know that it has moved from a business responsibility report to a business responsibility and sustainability report to a sustainability report itself. And eventually there is the movement that will go to an integrated report, where there'll be just one bulky set of documents, one report which has all financial and non-financial matters. So the ESG parameters will be completely dovetailed. They will coalesce with the financial disclosures, and we will eventually, India as an entity, India as a country, will move towards an integrated reporting in the near future. And the way the regime and the way the market regulators and the other regulators are moving, I think it's going to happen sooner than expected in the past. The pace at which change is happening, the disruption that is happening in a positive context, I think is phenomenal as far as India is concerned. And sustainability reporting, mind you, is going to be a reality for us in the very near future. At this point, I would just want to spend a minute to explain that ESG, the three pillars, are more of actions or activities. So these are things which need to be performed at the ground level by the corporates, by the companies, by the organizations. And then the reporting thereof, what is done on the ground, is ESG. This is a functional definition. And what is reported thereafter is your sustainability report that goes out. Next slide, please. Fine. So the next nearly 20-25 minutes, I would want to spend on understanding ESG in the Indian context. Having set the background as to what ESG is, what its drivers are, I would just want to now spend a little time and focus on ESG in the Indian context, or the Indian perspective to ESG. And to a certain extent, to a certain part of my conversation here, I will draw from the past, because it's absolutely important that we learn the lessons from the past. Because as it's very often said, those who do not learn from the lessons of the past are doomed to repeat them in future. And if we do not get our lessons from the past, I don't think India can ever go on to become the Vishwa Guru that we all aspire to be. So those of you who are also into literature, who do enjoy your spare time in reading good literature, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of the character called Sherlock Holmes, amongst many other things, in one of his stories, in one of his short stories called The Dancing Men, The Adventure of the Dancing Men, he says, "What one man can invent, another can discover." It's a very meaningful phrase, a very meaningful sentence that Sir Arthur uses here, where he says that what one man can invent, another can discover. It's for us to step back and ponder. As to why I make this point, I will come back to this at the end of the next few slides, when we will understand why this is important. Next slide, please. So when we talk about ESG, we are also parallelly talking about the E, or the environment aspect, stands for being accountable. The S, or the social part, is for being equitable. And the governance part is about being responsible. So when an organization wants to be practicing ESG in its holistic context, it needs to be accountable, it needs to be equitable, and it needs to be a responsible citizen. So when these three paraphrase, or when these three run as the ethos of an organization, it ensures that ESG are effectively practiced by the company. Next slide. Let me start off with the first one, which is about environment. And the Indian perspective for environment, I think across the spectrum, you will find that on all the three, E, S, and G, India has been the forerunner, India has been the front runner. And from time immemorial, from the days of yore, we have been practicing ESG in its truest, realist form. Caring for environment. What is environment? The E element of ESG actually mean? What does it actually mean? It means the conservation of resources, so that the next generation is not parched for it. What Mother Nature has given to us as part of her bounty, it is our bounden duty to ensure that we conserve it, and we leave this earth a better place. We bequeath a better earth for the next generation. But the tragedy of life is, in this pursuit of material comforts, in this pursuit of being materially over-ambitious, over-enthusiastic, we have started exploiting Mother Nature, and this is the result of which is what we are facing. As we speak, let us not even get back into history. As we speak, places like Bangalore are facing water scarcity. This was unheard of. This was a city of lakes. There were so many lakes spread across the length and breadth of Bangalore, and today that's a city that is parched for water. There were so many areas, so many small villages, which were at one point of time deltas, which were having rivers as garlands around them, which have all gone dry, and there's an acute shortage of water. This is one simple example of how environment is being ravished, how it is being exploited. In the Indian context, there is something called the Panchabhutas, that is the 5 natural elements that are there, and every human being had something called a Bhutaruna, that is a debt that he had to redeem as far as Mother Nature is concerned. So whether it is water, whether it is fire, whether it is any part of the physical natural attributes that Mother Nature has given us, it was his bounden duty to take care of. It was a debt. So when you have a debt, every individual had the duty to ensure that the debt was redeemed. One of the Upanishads, the Ishavasya Upanishad, It starts off by saying Ishavasyam idam sarvam. It translates literally to mean that the entire universe is a manifestation of the divine. That is, you see divinity, you see something which is special, which is unique in every aspect of life, every aspect of nature is but a part of the divine. So when you look at nature as being divine, you will not exploit it, you will not play mischief with it, you will not misuse it. So this was the context, and this is one of the several meanings. There are esoteric meanings, there are literal meanings, and so on. But one way to understand from our scriptures is that when you start worshipping nature, and not merely as a lip service, but when you start admiring and taking care of nature, you are really paying homage, you are really redeeming the debt to Mother Nature. That is why in the Indian context, we as a civilization have been people who worshipped plants and trees, rocks, fire, land, water. In other words, we have been worshippers of Mother Nature. So this worship was not merely ritualistic. This was to take care, this was to ensure that Mother Nature survives and remains with us for all time to come. And how did we do this? We did it by being in sync or in alignment or being in harmony with nature. We never went against the laws of nature. So long as we aligned and we were in sync with nature, man was happy. It sounds so absurd to even think about it, but the fact of life is that every living organism, from an earthworm to a lizard, can exist without a single human being remaining on the planet. But without any one of them, you and I as humans will not be able to survive. That is the balance that Mother Nature has asked us to strike. Next slide. If you look at it in the Indian context, celebration of festivals, everything has been aligned, everything has been kept in sync with Mother Nature. The kind of festivals that we celebrate, whether it is Shankranti or the usage of certain products or certain herbs or leaves or trees at a particular point in time, has always been in sync with nature. And we have, as a civilization, we have believed in using things which are biodegradable in nature. Plantain leaves, for example, every plant, every part of a plantain leaf, from the stem, the leaf, the fruit, the flowers, every part of it is used. It is nothing in it is useless. Every part of the plantain tree is useful. Plastics were unknown to a majority of us. For those of you who have led lives prior to 2000, if you have spent a significant part of your life in the 20th century, you would recall that while we traveled across railway stations, we would go and fill water from taps. We never had a concept of bottled water. When we went to hotels and get stuff packed for us, the edible stuff would always be packed in boxes that we would carry from home. Today, they've all been replaced with plastic covers and bags, which are huge environment hazards, which are carcinogenic, which are causing so much of injury to one and all. So these are things that have evolved. In the name of development, what has been happening is that the good age-old practices, traditions that we had have been forgotten. We have got weaned away from them, and we have got into a world of materialistic pursuits, which is eventually being harmful to us. Simple things like tying mango leaves when a festival happens at home has a significance, because mango leaves retain that ability to absorb carbon dioxide and give out oxygen, which is why they are tied at the top of the house and when a function happens. The corona pandemic, the COVID pandemic, when it struck, it had a lesson for us. A lot of people were asked to build their immunity by eating things which make them stronger from within. Knowingly or unknowingly, from generations, we have been using the very same spices in all the food that we cook. So we did not need to specifically add a particular item when something was cooked, because this is a part of life. Unlike many other cultures where they do not live or eat or carry on their life in sync with nature, ours has been completely different. Similarly, things like fasting on an Ekadashi. Unless somebody comes and tells us that this is intermittent fasting is good for health, or giving a break to your body once in a fortnight is good, we don't tend to believe it. But then our scriptures, our age-old beliefs have been that Ekadasi or fasting once in a fortnight is good for health. Next slide, please. Like this, there are any number of instances where man has the average Indian has lived entirely in consonance with Mother Nature. Usage, I just mentioned, I'll make a brief touch about it. Usage of things like tulsi, turmeric, neem, several spices and herbs. This is all a part of our nature. Every Indian household has a tulsi plant. Today, it's being said that the aroma that you derive from it is good for several ailments. It is included as part of several of these spices are included as part of the daily routine by the so-called Westerners, and it is being repackaged and sold back to us, and we are hastily adapting to them. The fact is, these were all age-old practices that we had, and we've somewhere in the past ignored them, and it's now being sent back to us in a repackaged format. Next slide. So the sum and substance of all this is we began exploiting and misusing nature from a position where we were in sync with nature. In one of my earlier slides, I mentioned that man was living in sync with nature. He was aligned completely with Mother Nature. Today, we have done the exact opposite of it. What are we doing? We are now working at nights and sleeping in the day. So why would not issues like depression and thyroid and blood pressure and diabetes crop up? They would, of course, when you go against nature. We sit in air-conditioned cabins right through the day. We deprive ourselves of sunlight and then end up having vitamin D deficiency, and people say, please go and sit in the sunlight. This is what we were doing all the time. We are popping tablets because we do not have proper food. We are made to get sessions for getting good sleep because we are keeping awake at night, and we are working during the day. Next slide. I'll come to the second pillar, which is around society. When I spoke about the concept of ESG, we said that society means there has to be equitable distribution. The key word for the S pillar was being equitable. So what does it mean? It means that in an island of prosperity, you cannot have an island of prosperity in an ocean of poverty. It's very appropriate that this entire series, you have such wonderful nomenclature for it, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or Sukhino Bhavantu as one of your other USPs is. Much before the Canadian expert Marshall McLuhan could think of the global village in the mid-20th century, our ancient Indian scriptures had thought of the whole world as being just one family. We had this concept of a Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is the entire world being one family and everybody being a part of the global oneness. So we just spoke about the Ishavasya Midam Sarvam. Everything is part of the divine, animate, inanimate, that which is material, that which is having life in it. Everything is a part of the universe, is a part of the universal spirit, and therefore you have to accord it that respect, that importance that needs to be given. So when you know that it is the same as what you are, you will not exploit it. You know that the life in another living organism is the same as it is in yours. You will not look to harm it. Whether it is a tree, whether it is a plant, you would want to cherish it, you would want to nourish it, you would want to grow with it, and you would not obviously want to destroy it. So when man started losing out on this synchrony with nature, when he started exploiting, that is, as to paraphrase the words, when man started to look beyond his need and started to look at his greed, that is when the problems started. When we talk of society, even the anthem that the Institute has and what played out at the start of this session, you talk about Shanti, about peace. And you do not wish for peace only for yourself or for your family or for your neighbors. We as a nation, we as a culture, we as a civilization have all along focused on global peace. We have prayed for the prosperity and sustenance of every living organism. You may know or you may not know. Everything that exists from north to south, east to west, two-legged animals, four-legged animals, multi-legged animals, our Upanishadic prayers talk of sustenance, of prosperity and happiness for all of them. So when the Western world today comes to us and pontificates about corporate social responsibility or taking care of people around you, at many levels, it's actually laughable because this is a part of our ethos again. Next slide. The various Vedas, the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Atharva Veda, they have waxed eloquent about what an individual needs to do for society. Today, CSR, we have this concept of CSR, we have this concept of looking at society and not having an island of prosperity, the notion of poverty. Millennia back, what did the Rig Veda say? It says the wealthy have an obligation to plant trees and build tanks for community as it would bring them glory. So it was important that natural resources were conserved and you did something for society at large. The Yajurveda goes on to say that you enjoy riches with detachment and do not cling to them because riches belong to the public. It is in many ways, it's the fulcrum, it's the philosophy of communism or socialism per se, that the wealth is not something which is owned by one, but owned by all. Well, there are words to this effect back in the Yajurveda. The Atharvana Veda says, create wealth with 100 hands and distribute them with 1,000 hands. So there is talk of charity, there is talk of discharge of social responsibility. There are specific verses in the Skanda Purana or in the Srimad Bhagavatam about how charity has to be engaged in. There are even numbers, 1/4, 1/10, what percentage of a person's earnings need to be given for charity, what needs to be kept as savings. To this granular level, our scriptures have gone. Next slide. Acharya Madhva, who hailed from Udupi in Karnataka and who's the proponent of the Dvaita or the duality school of Indian Vedanta. Adi Shankara was the first, Sri Ramanuja was the second, and Sri Madhvacharya was the third in the line. In one of his seminal works, the Bhashya on the Taittiriya Upanishad, he goes on to say that charity must be commensurate with one's wealth. It must be practiced with conviction. So it is not that you engage in charity just for the heck of it, just to show to people that you're doing some charity. He says that charity must be commensurate with one's wealth. So to put it in the way we understand it in today's world, it has to be ad valorem. Depending upon the kind of resources an individual has, his charity has to be commensurate with that. And this should be with conviction. It should not be a tick in the box. And further, Acharya Madhva goes on to say that it should be with a sense of social involvement, that you want the society to be developed. You do not want regional imbalances to happen. And this should be driven by an enlightened attitude in life. While today there is talk of corporate social responsibility, Sri Madhvacharya had spoken of individual social responsibility. So he says that if an individual gets bestowed upon a particular position in life, in society, he says, even if you are perhaps undeserving of it, please take that. And what do you take it for? Not for building wealth for the self or for the family, but for ensuring that you are a purveyor of society's wealth and use it for the betterment of society. So if an individual occupies a position in society, he should use that position for the betterment of society itself and not for self-aggrandizement. So this concept of individual social responsibility has been spoken of even about 800 years ago by our noble seers. Next slide. There are chapters and verses that you can quote from our scriptures, the Tirukkural, the Manusmriti, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita itself. It talks so eloquently about the kinds of charity that can be done. Chapter 17 of the Bhagavad Gita talks about various types of charity, those who do charity without anything being expected in return. There's no quid pro quo. There is charity where you do with some kind of expectation, and there is charity where it is with anonymity, without anonymity. There are so many kinds of charity that are permitted, that are recognized as part of our scriptures. The underlying theme is Sarva Loka Hitam. You want that the entire world, the entire universe to be happy. And much before we developed these concepts of a shareholder, stakeholder, and so on, our Indian philosophers had long thought of the entire world being one family, as I said, and every one of us was a stakeholder in this entire spectrum. Next slide. Now I come to the third part, which is about governance. E was on environment, S was on society, and we now touch upon governance, and I'll spend a few minutes talking about it. The concept of dharma, like many other Sanskrit words or precepts, is something that does not have a meaning in English. English language or any Western language for that matter will not be able to do justice to some of the most lofty and noble concepts that our Indian scriptures have had. So if you look at the word called dharma, it denotes upholding, supporting, nourishing, that which upholds, nourishes, or supports the stability of society. So the kind of words that are used is to uphold, support, and nourish the stability of society, maintaining social order, and the general well-meaning and progress of mankind. Anything that is conducive to the fulfillment of these objects is dharma. And this comes from a Supreme Court judgment. The Supreme Court of India itself has said that the word dharma connotes anything which helps to maintain the stability of society, ensure the well-being and progress of mankind, and anything which adds to this is dharma. This definition or this meaning that the Supreme Court gave is almost a direct paraphrasing of the words that you have from the Shanti Parva in the Mahabharata. It's mentioned there that anything which helps the upliftment of living beings and their welfare, if mankind can be kept happy, if their life can be made prosperous, and if their welfare is ensured, that is dharma. And our ancient scriptures, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavata, the Ramayana, are all full of guidelines and codes of conduct. So there are both prescriptions and proscriptions, a list of do's and don'ts that are prescribed for mankind to follow for a prosperous society, for good governance to be happening in the world. Next slide. The Mahabharata is rightly called the Panchama Veda because it has such noble concepts as the Bhagavad Gita, the Vidura Niti, the Vishnu Sahasranama. Madhvacharya goes on to say that anything that you will find in the world is there in the Mahabharata, and anything which is not there in the Mahabharata is not there anywhere in the world. So it's like much before our Encyclopedia Britannica was born, the Mahabharata was the Britannica of the universe. Next slide. So I'll spend some time on understanding some aspects of the Mahabharata, particularly in the context of governance, in the context of how professionals such as we can be implementing it, and what are the qualities of a good professional in today's world. So there are conversations between various characters in the Mahabharata. The conversation, let's say, between Kunti and Bhima, the conversations that Vidura has, what is called the Vidura Niti, the Uddhava Gita, of course the Bhagavad Gita, and the conversations that Bhishma and Yudhishthira have. There are all several characters that sketch what good governance is all about. They extol the virtues of governance and how it needs to be practiced. Next slide. So if you look at, I'll just take a particular example of the Vidura Niti. Vidura was a minister. He was one of the most intelligent, one of the wisest persons, and somebody who lived by the law in letter and spirit. He was an absolute professional where it came to discharge of duties. That is why you will find that when Krishna visits as an ambassador, he does not visit anybody else's house to take their gracious to accept. He does not accept anybody else's graciousness. He goes to the house of Vidura because Vidura represents all that is noble. Vidura represents that which is dharma, that which is good governance. And Vidura goes on to say in the course of the Vidura Niti, to distill, he says a professional is somebody who does not get flustered easily. He is somebody who always is strategic and bears the larger goal in mind. He is independent of his filial ties and predilections, something like not having a conflict of interest. He should be erudite and intelligent. He should not disclose when something is work in progress. All our non-disclosure agreements, our confidentiality agreements. And he says that information should be shared on a need to know basis strictly. So these are all things that we as corporate professionals follow every day. We need to have emotional equanimity. The larger goal is important. We need to be having subject matter expertise, and we should be able to maintain confidentiality in the task. Next slide. Vidura says there's this Latin concept of res ipsa loquitur, that is, the thing speaks for itself. He says that you don't need to go around tom-tomming the kind of work that you have done. The work should speak for itself. So when you have achieved a target, when you know that your budgets, your forecasts for a year have been made, and you are able to achieve them, and when the number is reached, you don't need to go and sit in your appraisal format and say that I have done this. Your manager already knows that this has been achieved. Vidura goes on to say that perseverance is important. It is needed to achieve goals, and you need to persevere in the face of all adversity. He talks about emotional equanimity, getting feedback, and learning from mistakes. These are all concepts, things like root cause analysis that we have today, learning from our mistakes. These are all things which have been talked about by people like Vidura in the Vidura Niti. Then he says that efforts and initiatives that you take should never be for the short term, but they should be for the long term. While operational and tactical planning is important, we should always have a strategy, a long-term strategy, and that should be our guiding factor. Next slide. In terms of remuneration, he says a good manager, a good professional is somebody who knows when to pay adequate compensation, when to go for reconciliation, when to go for treachery or even use force. What are the kinds of punishment that should be applied? What are the kinds of penalties or fines that should be levied? And where a person needs to be rewarded. So the rewards and recognition programs that companies talk of today, Vidura had spoken of it. He says a good professional should be dynamic, that is, keep himself abreast of what is happening. He should have dexterity. He should have the skill about his profession. He should engage in charity. And how does he do that charity? By managing his fiscal, by being fiscally prudent. It is not that you indulge in avarice and keep spending money. You need to have a proper fiscal management, he says. And for doing out all your activities, he says it is good to have access to proper advice and guidance. So we see professional opinion, we go and take opinions from external experts and keep them as a matter of record. And then he says in all this, you need to be empathetic to citizens in times of emergency. So when famines, plagues, or COVID kind of situations occur, he says a good manager is somebody who behaves with empathy, who understands the problem of his people. Next slide. As we briefly spoke about, he needs to be scholarly, he needs to have subject matter expertise. He should be emotionally balanced. He should not be somebody who gets emotionally swayed. A good leader is somebody who maintains that emotional equanimity. As again Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Dukkeshu anuvignamanaha sukeshu vikata jvaraha Bhita raga bhaya krodha sthitadhir muniruchyate. Somebody who is able to maintain that emotional balance and equanimity is what calls for, is what is important for a good manager. Next slide, please. The profile that an individual maintains, and this is so important in this world of social media, is that it should be appropriate and commensurate with one's position in life. You can't do a small thing and advertise it tenfold. The kind of publicity, the kind of articulation that happens should be commensurate with what has been achieved. It should not be extravagant. It should not be something that indulges in braggadocio. And confidentiality, where to disclose, what to disclose, how much to disclose, to whom to disclose, are all important, is what Vidura says. Overcoming a plethora of constraints and shenanigans of multiple stakeholders without losing the principles of long-term governance. So in whatever you're doing, never lose sight of what is the larger goal, what is the bigger goal to be achieved. Keeping that in mind, you start progressing. And then he says it is important to receive feedback, whether in the formal or an informal manner, whether positive or negative, whether it's a bouquet or a brickbat. Get that, cogitate over it, and learn without having to deracinate yourself, but learning from it and improving yourself. Next. He goes on to say that good communication, effective articulation, and constant learning, as it's been said in the current world, the illiterates of the world are not those who can't read and write, but those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. Because in today's world of chat GPT, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, information is key, information is power, and the rate of disruption is massive, it is real time. So the urge to learn, in Sanskrit, there's a beautiful word called jigyasa, that interest, that innate interest to keep learning, assimilate, and then share it with your peers. Knowledge sharing, as we call it, knowledge transfer, as we call it today, that is important. Knowledge is something which should be built all the time. It should be something which should be shared, and it should be shared for the benefit of the organization, for society, and for the nation or the state at large. So it should be used in a positive manner for the well-being of society. Next. And then these are all things which we can inculcate. These are practices which we can inculcate and implement. There are so many good practices that we just took the example of the Vidura Niti and how it can be interpolated, how it can be understood and implemented in today's world. Next slide. So I come back to the first point. Why is there so much of focus on the past? Over the last 15-20 minutes, after when we went through the 3 pillars of E, S, and G, I spoke and I spent so much of time on the Indian philosophy, the Indian scriptures, the Vedas, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the Bhagavata, and so on. These are all in the historical past. Why is it so important to touch upon them today? Because, as I said, those who fail to learn from the history are doomed to repeat it. So if there is something which our ancient forefathers have done, and if we have the benefit of their distilled wisdom, is it not imperative for us to learn from them? They are lessons. It is only a fool who learns from his own mistakes. An intelligent person is somebody who learns from others' mistakes. And we are fortunate to have such a rich history, such traditions, such customs, such knowledge, which has been bequeathed to us from millennia, from centuries, and which we are not in a position to adequately, forget exploiting, we are not even in a position to leverage them appropriately. Next slide. So I started by saying what one man can invent, another can discover. This was a line I said was taken from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Dancing Men. Sorry. And I said that let us step back and ponder, why was this necessary? So in each of the points that I spoke of on E, S, and G, whether it was on conservation of energy or environment, ensuring that there is no pollution, or about taking care of society, of taking care of people and the world in general, or about being good or adept at governance. Today, the McKinseys of the world, the Big Four of the world, the various consultants of the world will come and tell you to do all sorts of fancy things. They are important, they are contemporaneous, all right. But then they are all nothing but the distilled wisdom of our ancient forefathers. There is nothing that is practically new, excepting for the changes that might have emerged in technology. But the ethos, the thread on which all the flowers have been strung as a garland is the same. And that is our ancient Indian ethos about being good. You look at laws, for instance, you look at the Contract Act, you look at the Sale of Goods Act or the Transfer of Property Act. The underlying philosophy that you will find in any of these laws is that when you make a promise, live by it. If you break a promise, you need to be compensated for the loss that you might have incurred, directly or indirectly. This is all what the law of contract, this is all what the law of damages says. When you talk of special contracts, indemnity and guarantee, when you talk about fiduciary responsibilities today, when you talk of avoiding conflicts of interest, this is exactly what our philosophy has waxed eloquent upon all these millennia. We have said, do not covet somebody else's property. That which is yours, you use it properly for yourself and use it for the benefit of society. Do not usurp, do not take somebody else's property and treat it as your own. Treat everybody as a part of the global family, that entire humanity is one and the same. Treat everything with that same level of equanimity is what we have been saying. Specific examples, we saw the examples of using turmeric, of neem. The Western world today is coming back to us and saying that neem or turmeric has antiseptic characteristics and features in it. Really? Weren't we aware of it? We perhaps didn't understand how they acted upon us, but from our great-grandmother's times and from their great-grandmother's times and so on from time immemorial, we have been using these very herbs in everything that we cook, in everything that we eat. That has built that innate intelligence, that wisdom, that immunity in our bodies. As I said, the kind of festivals that we celebrate, they are all in sync with the weather. We go with nature. We are one with nature. We do not go against nature. So the point I was trying to drive home is what was innately Indian? What was our own? What is our own philosophy, our concepts that we have delivered to the world? But unfortunately, centuries of deprivation, centuries of being ruled by aliens has ensured that we have lost our moorings, we have missed out on them, and we have come to a situation where the same Western world has to come to us and pontificate on all this. Next slide. So in conclusion, what am I trying to summarize? What are we trying to say? In the context of ESG, and given the current regime's philosophy, and it walks its talk when it talks about Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, it wants India to become a Vishwaguru. It wants India to be not just a leader, it wants India to be a world teacher. And this is the key aspect. The Indian ethos itself it has never been about ruling. It has never been about might. It has never been about power. It is about wisdom. It is about knowledge. And even using material items, material aspects towards emancipation. So when even today we talk about, we do not want to be just a global superpower. We do not just want to be a so-and-so trillion economy. We just do not want to be the third largest economy in the world. We want to be a Vishwaguru. We want to lead by example. As again Krishna says, we want to be that stellar exemplar so that the world will emulate. How do we do that? In whatever activity we are doing, whatever profession, academic, industry, practice, consulting, wherever we are, let us not get rid of our cultural moorings. To put it in a better way, let us be proud of, let us flaunt, and let us be aware of our cultural moorings. Some of the very subtle things that are Indian context, in the Indian context are important, which the Western world fails to even appreciate, and they are trying to learn from us, is to save for a learning day. This concept of saving for a rainy day, that tomorrow there might be a problem, so do not spend everything that you get. You keep something in your bank, you keep something as a saving. It is this which stood the Indian economy in good stead across all global fiascos. Wherever economies have floundered, wherever they have fallen, it has been because of debt. But India is one of those countries where the average common man continues to believe in saving. That element of being frugal, that element of saving is what stands us in good stead. Secondly, we as a nation, we as a culture have believed in the importance of relationships and respect. It is not merely material. You respect a person for an individual for what he or she is, not because of the position that he or she is in. That is secondary. You primarily know an individual and have respect. So respect in relationships is something which is important even at the workplace. That has to predicate your relationship with whomsoever you get in with. And remember, like how we saw in one of the earlier slides, the strategy, the strategic goal is more important, and nothing is more important. Everything you can do, all of this is possible when you are a safe nation, when as a country you are safe and you are in a position to carry out whatever you want to. And that can come by power and strength. But that should never lead to arrogance. That should lead to humility. A person who has power and strength, talking about humility, is the finest example of culture that you can find. Next slide. So this is what I had to share about ESG as a concept, its key business drivers, why it is important in the Indian context. And I took you through a fairly long journey into history about how ESG has emerged in the Indian ethos, how it has had its history. We have several nuggets from history that we can draw on each of these parallels, on each of these pillars, and how we can continue to draw parallels from there, and how the ESG journey can go on by being constantly rooted in our cultural moorings. So I conclude my remarks with this, and I'm open to any questions. I'll try my best to answer them, whatever they might be.
Sir, we have received a few questions. So, first one is even now, most of the regulations on ESG, expenditure reporting and disclosure in businesses is limited to corporate entities. Why does the government ape the West in the ESG reporting and disclosure norms and regulations? Each and every citizen of India has constitutional duty towards ESG.
Absolutely, I think that's a very valid point. Yes, the focus of the government is, of course, on corporates today. But it is a matter of time that it will evolve. It will start permeating down to the various segments of society. And the second part of the question, I think I'm very happy, I'm very delighted it was brought up. I think a key aspect that we as Indians need to be cognizant of is our excessive focus on rights. Nobody talks about responsibilities or duties. We always tend to forget that with authority, and it's a fundamental principle of management, that with authority comes responsibility. Nobody is willing to look at those duties, those responsibilities. If today or in the last 10 years, we have had a regime which talks about Swachh Bharat, I think it is a matter of shame that you needed to have a mission to say, keep your premises, keep your precincts, keep your surroundings clean. I think it should be a part of our DNA that all of us have this responsibility of and duty of ensuring that we keep our places clean, we keep our surroundings clean, and that that in itself will indirectly go to ensure that pollution is eliminated and environment is safeguarded. That also adds to social harmony. So the key I would say is that people should be focusing on responsibility and duties and not so much on rights.
Right, sir. So the next question is, as a finance professional who are in charge of finalization of accounts along with annual reports of the company, how the concept of ESG is required to be understood by them?
It is right now, as we speak, ESG is still being seen as an adjunct. It is just being seen as a garnishing on the annual report. As you very rightly said, yes, a bulk of the focus is on preparation of financials, which is what every business entity will look at, which is what all the key investors will look at. But given the business drivers, as we spoke about, and the intensity with which, I mean, you cannot make money at the cost of causing starvation to a lot of other people. You cannot be earning, having pounds in your bank by ensuring that others are going without a shelter on their head, or that you're depriving them of their meal. So that balance will have to come over a period of time, that as much as the financial progress is happening, it should not be at the cost of detriment. It should be balanced. It should not be something which is at the cost of depriving somebody else of his sustenance. So it's a matter of time when both will be balanced. Financial importance is, of course, there. It will remain paramount, but ESG factors will get dovetailed. Today, as we speak, to a very large extent, it continues to remain perhaps a tick in the box. You just need to ensure that the BRSR reporting is done. But the day of integrated reporting is not far off, and the environmental, social, and governance impact of every financial decision will be evaluated.
So the next question is, what is the correlation between BRSR and ESG?
As I said briefly, ESG is the activity. ESG is what you do at the ground level. The philosophy and the strategy that you have, and the operations that ensure that it is being implemented on the ground level is ESG. Its measurement, its assessment, the impact that it has on society or the stakeholders concerned, and its articulation as part of the annual report is your BRSR. So the nexus is, one is the cause, the other is the effect. ESG is what you do, and BRSR is what you tell that you have done. You're on mute, I can't hear you.
Sir, we don't have any further questions. So I think only these 3 questions we have received. So we may now conclude the session, sir. So at the end, I would like to propose vote of thanks for this webinar. And I would like to convey my sincere thanks to CMA Dr. Ashish P. Thate, Chairman, Sustainability Standard Board, and other member of the board for all their guidance and motivation.